The Galactic Council had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years, and they had never once doubted their own supremacy. 12 elder races sat upon the highest seats of power in a chamber that floated at the heart of the Nexus system, surrounded by the light of 7 artificial suns that they had built when humanity was still learning to make. Fire High Arbiter Velfaxus of the Shamari race was being made entirely of living crystal, and his body glowed with a soft blue light. As he reviewed the sensor reports that had arrived from the Orion arm of the galaxy, something new had been detected there, and the Council's observation stations had identified an unknown fleet moving through space. Another primitive species has discovered faster than light travel, Velfaxus announced to the gathered counselors without any real interest in his voice. The Terathian delegate clicked his massive insectoid mandibles in what passed for a laugh among his kind and said, "Let me guess, they are using basic warp drives and celebrating as if they have achieved something remarkable. Humans." The Veloci ambassador confirmed as she floated in her water-filled diplomatic sphere. "They call themselves humans, and they come from a small world called Earth in an unremarkable solar system." Earth. Velfaxus repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. "Yes, I recall the name from our records. Their world was destroyed during the Nexari Purge 2 centuries ago, and we assumed the species had been completely eliminated. Apparently, some survived." The Mandari delegate observed. "Should we be concerned?" Laughter filled the chamber from several of the elder race representatives, because the very idea was absurd to them. The Council had monitored thousands of species across millions of years, and every single one had followed the same pattern of development. They would discover space travel, and then they would struggle to colonize their nearest star systems, and then they would encounter the Council and learn their place in the galactic hierarchy. The Accords of Subordination had been signed by 472 species before these humans, and every single one had accepted their position at the bottom of galactic civilization without serious resistance. "Draft a standard summons," Velfaxus commanded. "Inform these humans that they are required to present themselves before the Council within 40 cycles to demonstrate their technology and sign the Accords." The message was encoded and transmitted at quantum burst speeds across 3,000 light-years of space, and the Council expected to wait at least 30 cycles for any response. The response arrived in 17 minutes. Every counselor in the chamber froze when the communication officer announced the timing, because such speed was simply impossible, according to everything they knew about physics. The fastest quantum burst transmissions took hours to cross such distances, and no ship could travel faster than the message itself. "What does the response say?" Velfaxus demanded as his crystalline form flickered with the first hint of uncertainty he had felt in centuries. The communication officer's voice trembled slightly as she read aloud. "Message received and accepted. We will be there shortly." Shortly. The Terathian delegate repeated with contempt. "These primitives do not even understand the distances involved. It will take them at least 20 cycles to reach us even with the most advanced warp technology." 3 hours later, every alarm in the Nexus system activated simultaneously. Ship had appeared at the edge of the system, but it had not decelerated from faster than light travel in any way that the Council's sensors could understand. One moment, there was empty space, and in the next moment there was a vessel simply existing where nothing had been before, as if the ship had always been there, and the universe had only just noticed. "Track that vessel," Velfaxus commanded as his light pulsed with rapid agitation. "We cannot," the sensor operator reported with obvious fear in his voice. "Our instruments are not functioning correctly. The mass readings are fluctuating between 0 and infinity, and the ship appears to be in multiple locations at once." The Council chamber fell silent as they watched through the vast viewing windows that lined one wall of their floating palace. What they saw made no sense to their ancient and supposedly superior minds. The vessel approaching them was not large by galactic standards, perhaps a kilometer in length, but it was wrapped in something that defied description. The ship appeared to be surrounded by captured darkness itself, a shell of absolute void that was somehow darker than the space around it light from the 7 artificial suns bent around the vessel, as if afraid to touch it, and stars visible behind the ship seemed to twist and stretch as if space itself was being distorted. What manner of propulsion system creates such an effect? The Veloci ambassador asked in a voice that had lost all its earlier arrogance. None of the elder races could answer because none of them had ever seen anything like this in 12,000 years of galactic dominance. The ship came to rest in orbit around the council station and remained there in perfect stillness while the councilors argued about what to do next. We should destroy it. The Tarathian delegate insisted. We cannot allow unknown vessels to approach the Nexus without proper inspection. Destroy it with what? Velthaxis asked coldly. We do not even understand what we are looking at, and you wish to attack it. Communication request appeared on every screen in the chamber simultaneously, even though the council systems should have been protected against unauthorized access. The face that appeared on the screens was disturbingly ordinary. A human female with brown skin and dark hair and calm eyes that showed no fear whatsoever, despite the fact that she was addressing beings who had ruled the galaxy since before her species had invented writing, honored council. The human spoke in perfect diplomatic standard. I am Ambassador Elena Vance of the United Human Coalition, and I thank you for your invitation. May we come aboard to discuss the terms you mentioned? Velthaxis stared at the screen and realized with growing unease that the human was not asking permission but merely observing the formality of doing so. You may, he replied, because refusing would accomplish nothing except making the council appear weak. Excellent. Ambassador Vance smiled, and it was not a warm expression. We have much to discuss about the future of this galaxy and humanity's role within it. The transmission ended, and the council members looked at each other in the silence that followed. None of them would admit it aloud, but for the first time in 8,000 years, the elder races felt something they had long forgotten how to name. They felt afraid. Ambassador Elena Vance walked into the council chamber with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power stood behind her words. She was shorter than every alien in the room by a significant margin because most of the elder races had evolved to heights of 3 or 4 meters, while humans rarely exceeded 2 yet. Something about her presence made the towering beings around her seem smaller than they should have been too. Officers in midnight black uniforms flanked her. A tall man with a shaved head, whose uniform bore the insignia of a fleet admiral, and a woman with sharp features, whose eyes never stopped scanning the room for potential threats. Welcome to the Nexus. High Arbiter Velthaxis spoke with careful formality as his crystalline body shifted through various shades of blue. We were not expecting your arrival for many more cycles given the distance you needed to travel. We took a shortcut. Ambassador Vance replied with a slight smile that did not reach her eyes. The Tarathian delegate leaned forward on his massive armored legs, and his mandibles clicked together in a pattern that conveyed irritation and warning at the same time. You will submit your vessel for inspection immediately, he declared in a tone that expected absolute obedience. All new species must register their technology with the Council before they can be granted any recognition or rights within civilized space. With respect, Delegate, Vance responded without any change in her calm expression. That will not be possible. A shock wave of disbelief passed through the chamber because no species had ever refused a direct order from the Council in living memory. The last civilization that had attempted such defiance had been the Tarathians themselves, and that refusal had ended in a war that claimed 6 billion lives before the rebellious species finally submitted. You dare to refuse? The Tarathian delegate rose to his full height of 4 meters, and his warriors began reaching for their weapons. Vance did not flinch, and her two officers did not even glance at the threat surrounding them. "Perhaps a demonstration would help clarify our position," she said in the same calm voice she had used since arriving. Before any of the counselors could object or give orders, she spoke into a small device wrapped around her wrist. "Captain Okonkwo, execute Protocol 12. Non-lethal parameters." Through the massive viewing windows that dominated one wall of the chamber, the council watched as the human vessel began to move. But move was not the right word for what they witnessed. The ship did not accelerate or turn or perform any maneuver that made sense to beings who had mastered conventional physics millennia ago. Instead, dark matter-wrapped vessel flickered across space in a series of impossible jumps, appearing in one location and then another and then a third, all within the span of a single heartbeat. After images of the ship persisted in space for several seconds before fading as if reality itself was struggling to understand what had just happened. What kind of engine allows such movement? The Veloci ambassador asked in a voice that trembled with something between fear and scientific fascination. "Watch," Vance said simply. The human vessel came to rest approximately 50,000 kilometers from a small planetoid that had orbited the Nexus system since before the Council was founded. This asteroid was 300 kilometers across and had been used as a mining station, and then a prison, and then a memorial site across thousands of years of galactic history. Now it served as a target. The weapon that fired from the human vessel made no light and produced no sound and generated no energy signature that the Council's sensors could detect. One moment the asteroid existed as it had for billions of years, and in the next moment it simply was not there anymore. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, because destruction implied broken pieces and scattered debris and expanding clouds of dust. Matter that had comprised 300 kilometers of rock and ice and metal had simply ceased to exist at the most fundamental level, as if someone had erased it from reality itself. Dark matter conversion. Ambassador Vance explained into the absolute silence that followed. "We learned to harness the 95% of the universe that you never could." She turned to face the Council directly, and her eyes held no pity for their shock. "Your science is always focused on ordinary matter, the atoms and molecules and energy that make up only 5% of what exists." She continued, "You built magnificent civilizations and developed incredible technologies, but you never looked into the darkness between the stars. Never wondered what else might be hiding there. The void." Velfaxis whispered as understanding began to dawn in his ancient mind. "The void?" Vance confirmed. "The empty spaces that your ships travel through as quickly as possible. The darkness that you have always feared and avoided. We made it our home, and we learned its secrets." She gestured toward the viewing window where her vessel hung in space, wrapped in its shell of absolute darkness. "Our weapons do not destroy matter in any way you understand. They return it to its original state before the universe decided it should be visible and solid and real. And our engines do not travel through space the way yours do." Her smile returned, and this time it was sharper. "Our engines treat space itself as a suggestion rather than a law." The Terathian delegate had lowered his warriors' weapons at some point during the demonstration, and now he stood frozen, like a statue carved from chitin and hatred. "This is impossible," he finally managed to say. 2 centuries ago my ancestors said the same thing when they were dying by the billions," Vance replied, and her voice carried an edge of old pain and cold fury. "They said it was impossible that the galaxy would abandon them. Impossible that no one would come to help. Impossible that they could survive in the void between stars with nothing but desperation and hope." She stepped closer to the Council's central platform, where the highest-ranking members sat in their seats of ancient power. "They were wrong about it being impossible, and so are you." The Council had not felt fear in 8,000 years, but they remembered it now as they looked at the human ambassador and the dark void that swirled around her. vessel in the empty space where an asteroid had existed just moments before. They remembered fear very well indeed. The private chamber where High Arbiter Velthaxis met with Ambassador Vance was designed to intimidate visitors through its sheer size and the magnificent view it offered. Of the Nexus System's 7 suns today, the view only reminded him of how easily the humans had destroyed something that had existed for billions of years. How did this happen? Velthaxis asked as his crystalline form dimmed to a deep troubled blue. Your species achieved basic spaceflight barely 3 centuries ago, and we have monitored your development throughout that entire period. You should still be struggling with primitive fusion drives and celebrating each new colony as a major achievement. He turned to face the human ambassador directly. How did you surpass every elder race in the galaxy in the span of 200 years? Ambassador Vance's expression changed from diplomatic calm to something harder and colder. Something that carried the weight of generational trauma and centuries of bitter memory. Because you left us alone to die, she said simply. She activated a holographic display unit that projected images into the air between them and what appeared made Velthaxis. Light pulse with sudden recognition. Earth hung in space before them. A beautiful blue and green world covered with oceans and forests and the lights of billions of living beings. Then, the image changed to show that same world wrapped in fire and poison. Its oceans boiling and its forests burning and its cities crumbling under bombardment from orbit. The Nexari purge, Vance said with quiet fury in her voice. Does the Council remember what happened 200 years ago? Velthaxis remembered all too well, though he wished desperately that he didn't know a rogue species called the Nexari had swept through the outer arms of the galaxy with a religious fervor for destroying what they called lesser life. They had burned world after world, sterilizing entire civilizations that had committed no crime, except existing at a lower level of technological development. The Council debated intervention for 6 full cycles. Vance continued as the holographic images showed ship after ship raining death upon the human homeworld. You discussed procedure and protocol and the proper legal framework for military action while billions of people burned. We did eventually act. Velthaxis protested weakly. The Nexari were destroyed before they could. Before they could, what? Vance interrupted him with sharp words. Before they could kill more than they already had. The Nexari burned themselves out through their own fanaticism, but not before they sterilized over 40 developing worlds, including Earth. The holographic display shifted again to show something new. Thousands of crude vessels fleeing from the dying Earth. Ships that had never been designed for long-distance travel, now carrying the last remnants of human civilization into the endless void. We recorded the destruction of your solar system. Velthaxis admitted with shame coloring his crystalline light. We assumed that your species had been completely eliminated along with the others. 97% of us were eliminated, Vance confirmed, and her voice carried the echo of 8 billion graves. 8 billion people reduced to 200 million survivors, crammed into colony ships and research stations, and anything else that could hold air and reach escape velocity. She stepped closer to the High Arbiter, and he found himself backing away from a being half his size. For 60 years we drifted through the void between star systems with nothing but generation drives that could barely push us to 1% of light speed. Our children were born in cramped metal corridors and never saw a sky or felt wind on their faces. Our supplies dwindled, and our ships began to fail, and every day more people died. The holographic images show what life had been like on those refugee vessels. Families sleeping in rotation because there was not enough space for everyone to lie down at once. Children being taught that darkness and silence were normal because they had never known anything else. Funeral ceremonies where bodies were recycled into the ship's systems because waste was not permitted when survival hung by such thin threads. The council never came to help. Vance said, "No elder race sent ships to search for survivors. No one came to offer assistance or shelter or even acknowledgement that we still existed. We did not know." Velfaxis said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "You did not care to know." Vance corrected him, "And so we learned to survive without you. We learned to make our home in the void between stars where no one else would go because no one else was desperate enough to try." She gestured at the darkness visible through the chamber's windows. The black spaces between the 7 suns where light did not reach. "That is where we found dark matter," she said. "Not in laboratories or research stations, but in the desperate emptiness where our dying ships drifted while the galaxy forgot we existed. You found dark matter." Velfaxis repeated as the full implications began to dawn on him. "We found everything," Vance said. "Your civilization spent millennia studying the 5% of the universe that you could see and touch and measure. But you never ventured into the darkness because you never had to. We had no choice." Her voice carried something like grim satisfaction now. "The dark matter filaments that connect galaxies became our highways. The invisible energy that your scientists could only theorize about became our fuel. The forces that your physics said should not exist became our weapons." She looked at Velfaxis with eyes that held 2 centuries of pain and anger, and ultimately triumph. 200 years ago, we were refugees dying in the void. Today, we have a fleet of 4,000 dark matter warships crewed by the descendants of survivors who remember exactly how the galaxy treated them when they needed help. "What do you want?" Velfaxis asked because he could no longer pretend that humanity was just another primitive species to be managed and controlled. "We want what was taken from us." Vance replied, "We want acknowledgement and recognition and a seat at the table where decisions about the galaxy are made. But most importantly, we want to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." She turned away from him to look out at the stars. "The void taught us many things, High Arbiter. But the most important lesson was this: no one should ever be left alone to face the darkness." The full council convened an emergency session for the first time in over 1,000 years. Every representative of every elder race was present either in person or through holographic projection. And the chamber hummed with anxious energy as beings who normally spent their days in comfortable superiority now faced something they could not control. They must be contained. The Tarathian delegate insisted as his armored form paced back and forth across his section of the chamber. "We cannot allow this technology to spread beyond their control. We must form a coalition of all elder race military forces and strike before they can expand further." "Strike with what exactly?" The Veloci ambassador interrupted from her water-filled sphere. "You witnessed the same demonstration I did, delegate. Our weapons would be completely useless against vessels that do not obey the same laws of physics that ours do. Then we developed new weapons." The Tarathian responded, "We have the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy at our disposal, and given time we can surely." "Time." The Mandari delegate spoke up with unusual boldness for the youngest species on the council. "How much time do you imagine they will give us? They cross 3,000 light years in 3 hours, and you think we can develop countermeasures before they decide we are a threat?" Arguments erupted across the chamber as 12 species that had never agreed on anything before now found themselves unified only in their fear of what humanity represented. The Shamari wanted to negotiate and buy time for study, while the Tarathians demanded immediate military action, and the Veloci suggested fleeing to distant parts of the galaxy where humans might not follow. None of them noticed when the chamber doors opened. Ambassador Vance entered the room, but she was not alone. This Time behind her walked 30 humans in military dress uniforms. Admirals and generals and fleet commanders, whose faces showed no expression at all as they filed into the chamber and took positions along the walls and behind them, visible through the vast viewing windows that showed the space around the council station. The sky itself had changed, where there had been a single human vessel just hours ago. There were now hundreds. The dark matter warships had arrived silently, emerging from folds in space that the council's sensors had completely failed to detect. And now they hung in perfect formation around the Nexus system like a shell of captured shadows. Each ship was wrapped in the same absolute darkness that the council had witnessed before, each one carrying weapons capable of unmaking matter at the fundamental level. And together they formed a fleet that could have destroyed every elder race civilization in the galaxy without significant effort. What is the meaning of this? Valfaxis demanded, though his crystalline form had dimmed to near darkness with obvious fear. The survivors of the Purge have been discussing your question, Ambassador Vance announced as she walked calmly to the center of the chamber. The question of what humanity wants from this encounter. She looked around at the gathered representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy since before humanity existed. We have reached consensus, she said. The chamber fell absolutely silent as every being present held their breath, waiting for whatever came next. First, Vance began. We want acknowledgement. The Galactic Council will formally recognize that it failed in its fundamental duty to protect developing species from threats like the Nexari. That is, the Terathian delegates started to protest. You will build a memorial, Vance continued as if he had not spoken. Here at the heart of your civilization, bearing the names of every world the Nexari burned while you debated proper procedures. 8 billion humans and billions more from 40 other worlds will be remembered, and the galaxy will never be allowed to forget what happens when those with power choose not to act. Murmurs of protest rose from several sections of the chamber, but they died quickly as the fleet outside shifted its formation with weapons arrays beginning to glow with dark light. Second, Vance said, we want representation. Humanity will take a permanent seat on this council, not as a subordinate species begging for recognition, but as an equal voice in galactic affairs. Impossible, the Terathian delegate snarled as he rose to his full height. You are infants compared to us. Your civilization is barely 3 centuries old, and you expect to sit among races that have existed for millennia. The Accords of Subordination exist for good reason, and the Accords of Subordination end today. Vance cut him off with words that carried the weight of absolute certainty. For us and for every species that comes after. No civilization will ever again be forced to bow before the Council simply because they achieved space travel more recently than you did. She stepped toward the Terathian delegate, and though she barely reached his chest in height, he found himself backing away from her. We are the species that conquered death itself. In the void between stars, she said, we are the species that turned your universe's darkest secrets into weapons and engines, and shields that you cannot comprehend. We are what your negligence created, and we are, despite everything, still willing to talk, instead of simply taking what we could easily take. She looked around the chamber one more time at beings who had ruled unchallenged for longer than human. Civilization had existed. Third and finally, we want partnership, she said, and her voice softened slightly from cold fury to something that almost resembled hope. Humanity is not here for revenge, though we would be justified in seeking it. We are here because the galaxy is vast and darker things than us hide in the spaces between the stars. We learned that lesson during our exile in the void, and you are about to learn it too. She paused to let her words sink in. Something is out there in the dark matter streams that connect the galaxies. Something that was watching us during our years of survival, and something that is beginning to move. We do not yet fully understand what it is, but we know enough to be afraid." The council chamber was silent as the weight of her words settled over every being present. "We can face what is coming alone," Vance said finally. "We have the ships and the weapons and the knowledge of the void that you lack. But we would prefer not to. We would prefer to face the darkness together with allies who have learned from the mistakes of the past." She extended her hand toward Velthaxis in the human gesture of agreement and cooperation. "What is your answer, High Arbiter? Does the Council choose partnership, or does it choose to be left behind while humanity protects the galaxy alone?" The future of galactic civilization hung in the balance as the crystalline being looked at the human hand extended before him and considered what 12,000 years of arrogance had finally brought his people to face. The vote took less than one cycle to complete. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Council voted unanimously on a matter of significance. Every elder race representative casting their support for the human proposal because they understood that the alternative was not truly an alternative at all. The memorial was built on the steps of the council spire itself, a towering obelisk of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Human architects had designed it deliberately to echo the dark matter that wrapped their warships, a permanent reminder of what humanity had become in the void between stars on its polished surface. Holographic text scrolled endlessly upward, name after name flowing past in an eternal river of the dead 8 billion humans who had perished on Earth. 2 billion more who had died during the desperate flight into exile, and billions of beings from 40 other worlds who had burned in the Nexari purge while the galaxy's greatest powers argued about proper procedures. Ambassador Elena Vance stood before the completed memorial on the day of its dedication, with her new title weighing heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer merely an ambassador but High Counselor of Humanity, a position that made her equal in rank to beings whose species had ruled star systems when her ancestors were still learning to plant crops. Beside her stood Velthaxis, his crystalline form reflecting the obelisk's shadow in ways that made him appear darker than he had ever been. "Your species frightens me," he admitted quietly as they watched the names scroll past together. "Good," Vance replied, but there was no cruelty in her voice. "Fear can be a teacher when properly understood. It taught us everything we know." "And what exactly did it teach you?" the High Arbiter asked with genuine curiosity. She was silent for a long moment as children's names flowed past on the memorial, young ones who had never grown old enough to understand why fire was falling from their sky. "It taught us that the void does not care about treaties or hierarchies or ancient wisdom," she said finally. "The darkness between stars has no respect for how long your civilization has existed, or how advanced you believe yourself to be." She turned to face him directly. "It taught us that survival is earned through sacrifice and struggle, never given freely by those who already have it. And it taught us that power without responsibility is nothing more than tyranny waiting to reveal itself." Velthaxis considered her words as the 7 sons of the Nexus system cast their light across the memorial plaza where thousands of beings from dozens of species had gathered to witness this historic moment. "What comes next?" he asked. Vance replied simply, "The Accords of Subordination are abolished as of today, and developing species will no longer be forced to bow before the Council simply because they achieved space travel after you did." She gestured toward a group of delegates from a species called the Rethani, small furry beings whose civilization had discovered faster than light travel only 20 years ago, and who had been living in terror of Council inspection ever since. "They will have our protection now," she said, "and so will every other young species in the galaxy. Humanity has not forgotten what it feels like to be alone and afraid, and we will not allow others to suffer that fate. And if new threats emerge, Valfaxis asked with worry coloring his crystalline light. Things worse than the Mexari. Vance looked up at the sky where humanity's dark matter fleet held position in an invisible shell around the Nexus system normal. Sensors could not detect them, but she knew exactly where each of the 4,000 warships waited, ready to respond to any threat against the civilization they had once despised and now protected. Then they will learn what we learned, she said with quiet certainty. The darkness is not empty. Humanity lives there now, and we remember what it is like to be abandoned. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy transformed in ways that no one had predicted. The accords of subordination were formally dissolved, and the 472 species that had signed them were granted full recognition and equal rights within galactic civilization. Developing worlds that had once been monitored with condescension were now offered assistance and protection. Their technologies shared freely, and their cultures respected as valuable rather than primitive. The Council's military fleets began training alongside human warships, learning new physics and new tactics and new ways of seeing the universe that the elder races had never imagined possibly to Raytheon. Warriors who had once dismissed humans as weak and inferior now sought to learn from human combat instructors who had survived battles against forces the insectoids could barely comprehend. Chimeri scientists who had believed their species understood the fundamental nature of reality now studied alongside human researchers who casually manipulated the 95% of the universe that had always remained hidden and deep in the void between galaxies, far from any star or planet or conventional form of matter. Human vessels continued their endless patrols through the dark matter streams that connected all things. It was there in that absolute darkness that they had found the signals patterns in the dark matter flow that could not be natural. Rhythms and structures that suggested intelligence of a kind that even humanity did not fully understand. Something else had made its home in the void. Something that had been watching with patience, that made the elder races seem young by comparison. Captain Amara Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the dark matter warship Erebus and studied the latest readings from the void with careful attention. Her great-grandmother had been among the original refugees who fled burning Earth 3 generations ago, and her family had served in the human fleet ever since. The signals are getting stronger, her sensor officer reported. Whatever is out there, it is beginning to move. Okonkwo nodded and turned to look out at the darkness that surrounded her ship. Humanity had found salvation in the void and had used the secrets of that darkness to rise from near extinction to galactic dominance. Now something else was stirring in those same shadows, and humanity would need to be ready. Inform High Counselor Vance, she commanded. Tell her that the darkness is waking up, far away in the Nexus system. Elena Vance received the message and looked out at the memorial, where the names of the dead continued to scroll. Past, she had promised that no species would ever again face the darkness. Alone, it was a promise she intended to keep no matter what. Emerged from the void, the galaxy had abandoned humanity once, and humanity had returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. Whatever was coming next, humanity would face it together with allies who had finally learned the cost of indifference. And this time, no one would be left behind.